if the Indo-Pacific strategy is part of an overall global approach towards China, which is more adversarial, then what they are looking for is partners who can add military value to the United States. And, that is where I think India does not fit in. We have our own priorities, we have our own agenda, and we have our own needs. And that, to the extent the American policy fits in, we will have to collaborate with them, cooperate with them, probably stick it out in some areas where we don't agree. We have to grin and bear it in some areas. We have to react in some others.
Hello and welcome to the Times of India. You're watching Global Pulse with me, Neha Khanna. Tonight I'm joined by a special guest, Ambassador Ranjan Mathai, former Foreign Secretary of India. He's someone who's had a very distinguished career as a diplomat. He's also served as India's High Commissioner to the UK and Ambassador to France. Ambassador Ranjan Mathai, a very warm welcome to Global Pulse.
Thank you, and good to be here. And it is certainly warm, so it's good to be here. And thanks for the welcome.
That's very kind of you, sir. Now, to say that India-US ties have reached their lowest ebb in decades sounds almost like an understatement. This also is a phase of tremendous foreign policy challenges for India. Let's unpack different dimensions of it, sir, with you. If I may begin by asking you about the latest provocation from the Trump administration. US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who along with Trade Advisor Peter Navarro has made some of the most offensive and insulting statements about India, has now said India needs to be fixed. I'm quoting him. He says we have a bunch of countries to fix, like Switzerland, Brazil, India. These are countries that need to really react correctly to America, open their markets, stop taking actions that harm America, and that's why we're off sides with them. What are your thoughts, sir? How does India deal with such a hostile and antagonistic administration that has all but torched the India-US relationship?
Well, it's certainly true that the administration Trump 2 is so completely different from Trump 1 that much of this was really quite unexpected. I think there's a degree of bluster also in some of the statements coming out from individuals, because at the same time we are hearing from very senior people in the administration, from top-level people, that we are close to a deal with India. And in fact, our chief negotiator, Mr. Piyush Goyal, and before that, Mr. Agarwal, the Commerce Secretary, both had given fairly positive indications. So one doesn't know if these are negotiating tactics. My hunch is that they are. They are attempts to pressure us into keeping a high level of tension going while we negotiate. But at the end of the day, going by statements, we may be closer to some kind of a deal on commerce and trade than we were earlier. But it is a fact that we have been under very, very heavy pressure to get this deal done and to work towards American targets really in the deal. And that is part of a reality we all have to get used to, not just India, but all partners of the US in this Trump administration, that they are not just transactional, but extremely ruthlessly focused on the America First agenda, whether it is in their domestic policy or in their foreign policy or in their trade policy. So that they are looking out for themselves. They want to extract the best possible deal. And that, I think, is what has driven these kind of statements and this kind of negotiation hardball.
I just meant to talk about how, Donald Trump, despite all the claims he's made about India being a great partner and Prime Minister Modi being a great friend of his, the reality seems to point in the opposite direction. He has swung a wrecking ball into the India-US relationship. As I mentioned, he singled out India for steep 50% tariffs, including punitive tariffs for buying Russian oil. He has now slapped 100% tariffs on branded and patented pharmaceutical products. He's imposed a staggering fee on H-1B visa applications. He's withdrawn the Chabahar port sanctions waiver. He's called India a dead economy, and his surrogates attack and threaten India on a daily basis. So each of these actions is downright hostile and antagonistic, and one that impacts Indian interests adversely. So what, according to you, sir, should India's damage control and balance of power look like in this Trump era?
Well, for one thing, we, I think, have to persevere with the negotiations on trade, because I think that is where the main action is right now in terms of an actual engagement between our two countries. And much is made of the fact that, while Trump's sort of ministers, his secretaries, the trade representative and others have all made nasty remarks, Trump himself has eschewed from saying anything hostile, at least about our prime minister, who he keeps repeating is a very good guy and a good friend and so on. So I have a feeling that if we get the trade part of the relationship at least back on an even keel through some kind of an agreement, then we can look bit by bit at some of the other elements in the relationship. But at the end of the day, I think we are in a completely new situation. It appears to me that we will have to calibrate our foreign policy, keeping in mind that this Trump administration is in the midst of what looks like a policy review. It's very hard to say, because sometimes they flip literally from one day or 1 week to another, completely changing their stance, their statements, and their approaches. But broadly speaking, it looks like there are 2 or 3 different policy options which are competing for influence and control over the final direction which will be taken by President Trump himself. And one is that, they have identified on a global stage what is it that they need to do to retain American primacy? What is it that they need to do to implement the agenda of the president, which is America first, whether it's in trade or in defense or in any other sphere? And these are 2 or 3 different options. One is a little more of the same, in which the United States regards China as its primary adversary, and perhaps to a lesser extent some other powers. But in this context, there is more of the same policy as was followed out earlier. That is a very strong transatlantic relationship, an Indo-Pacific policy which focuses now on defense as much as on other elements. And finally, third, a very, very strong Pacific part of that Indo-Pacific policy built around Japan and Korea and others. There is a second, which is more shifting towards an accommodative stance towards China, because that perhaps might suit their short-term interests better. And in that context, many of the relationships in what is called the Indo-Pacific become less important. And in fact, the Defense Secretary has been using the expression Asia-Pacific again after a long time, rather than Indo-Pacific. And the others in the relationship have to fit it in. There is a third, which I think is probably not going to succeed, which is a more hemispheric policy. Mr. Elbridge Colby has been reported to have quoted this, saying we should consolidate the American hemisphere first and let others deal with the other parts of the world, though we will have our partners in a classical balance of power arrangement. In all these 3 arrangements, India, as it currently stands, doesn't seem to fit into the calculation. That seems to be the problem. Now, we obviously will have to recalibrate our relations, our relationships built on one absolute clear fact. We have our own priorities, we have our own agenda, and we have our own needs. And that, to the extent the American policy fits in, we will have to collaborate with them, cooperate with them, probably stick it out in some areas where we don't agree. We have to grin and bear it in some areas. We have to react in some others. That, I think, would be my prescription for going ahead with our India first policy. We must be very clear. We must follow an India first policy.
It's interesting, sir, some of the points that you've made, and extremely important too. You know, Trump talks about America first. You think we need to focus on India first. And I think that is really a message that the Modi government has sent out on multiple occasions, especially vis-a-vis the Russia-Ukraine war, for instance. But, you know, talking about the America first strategy, many experts today, including those in America, say that Trump's policies are so isolationist that more than America first, it seems to be America alone today. But talking particularly about the Indo-Pacific, you have made a very important statement there, sir. You're saying that India does not seem to fit in anymore with the Trump administration's larger Indo-Pacific agenda. Now, you know, has the United States taken a 180-degree turn on this? Because for years together, the United States invested in its bilateral relationship with India because it saw India as a democratic counterweight to an aggressive, expansionist and hegemonic China. Has that been flipped on its head by the Trump administration?
I wouldn't say it's been flipped on its head, but you know, the Indo-Pacific strategy which has been followed had a number of pillars. The IPEF was one, the Quad, as we know it, is another, and there are many, many elements to it. But fundamentally, in the calculation, as I said, of these different strategies, if the Indo-Pacific strategy is part of an overall global approach towards China, which is more adversarial, then what they are looking for is partners who can add military value to the United States. And, you know, that is where I think India does not fit in. We have been taking our time. We have been looking at the Quad in many different ways. We are very much joined the IPEF, and we would like to be part of various pillars. But are we willing to commit to an American-led military element in the Quad? For very good reasons, we may not. So that is where I think we do not fit in. So that, but as I said, it is not even a settled strategy. It could be, from the discussions which are going on, it looks like increasingly there are forces which are propelling Mr. Trump and his administration in the direction of some kind of grand bargain with China. So that, again, is another area where India will not fit in. So I think that is where the problem starts from. It is not as if they have completely given up on India as some kind of a counterweight, but it is a counterweight which has to prove its weight over time. And there is very lack of patience, if I may put it that way, about the kind of time which Trump has for any of his partners when working on his America First agenda.